We are witnessing the trigger of the God Valley incident as we see how the treasure of Hachinosu, Shakuyaku herself, is suddenly reframing so much of what we understand of this historical incident, including a lot of insane foreshadowing that Oda presented us with many years ago, as well as many more details and linguistic nuances that we need to break down. So let's get to dissecting this chapter of One Piece together. On the cover we see Yamato, Ocho, and Kiku praying at the grave of the hero of Ringo, who we were told was born in the West Blue and lived in Ringo and was raised there. Here we are told even further that this hero died protecting the village from Kaido and that there was no trace of his body left behind. Once again, I'd like to suggest the idea that this is Jigoro, the zombie from Thriller Bark who was possessed by Zoro's shadow, as he was said to be from West Blue but has a fairly Wano-like name. The fact there was no trace of his body left behind would make a lot of sense, as the corpse itself could have been stolen by Moria alongside Ryuma's to be taken to Thriller Bark. So the people of Wano assume the body was just not found. As a reminder, Ringo took a few years after Kaido took over to properly fall, so the timeline would actually line up. We see that Ocho is praying while kneeling, while Kiku is also praying with only one arm due to her circumstances. Yamato instead is praying with broader arms, doing it a bit more sloppily like a tourist would, as Yamato is still very sheltered from Wano's culture, but the effort is appreciated. Meanwhile, at the base of the hill, Ulti is making a snowman of what seems to be her adoptive father Kaido, while Page One looks on. The chapter opens at the International Charity Federation Temple, a place known as the Food Colony. As we are described, this is a temple run by monks that run the International Charity Federation, what appears to be a non-profit group raising funds across the world in the name of charity to help children in need. Their headquarters here appropriately look like a Buddhist temple, with its members appearing like Buddhist monks, wielding staffs and having shaved heads. As Big Mom points out, however, it appears this entire charity is a sham, and they simply hoard money for themselves, so the Rocks pirates plunder all their valuables. This explains the name Food Colony, as Futokoro ni in Japanese means to pocket all the money. We see Ochoku coordinating everyone, Ganzui and Barbell carrying large bags, Marlon gunning down people, Stussy running for it, and Linlin charging forward with Zeus and Prometheus by her side. Kaido, Newgate, and Kyo are all in the basement, so Shiki throws them a bomb to screw them over, which as we can see he tosses as he's floating in mid-air, seemingly having already attained his Fua Fua no Mi or float float fruit powers. Shiki's reaction to having forgotten about them is incredibly similar to his vivid expressions in Strong World, where he was shown he wasn't just a cruel and scheming man, but also a bit of a goofball sometimes. In turn, however, Whitebeard tilts the entire island, using the exact same technique that he used to rampage Marineford, tossing Linlin, Stussy, Stroyson, Ganzui, Marlon, Ochoku, and Barbel all in the air, with a bonus shock reaction from Zeus, who of course is simply floating and isn't affected. The only one unscathed instead is Shiki, as obviously his fruit just lets him float, though Kyo takes beef with him for having betrayed him, as the two of them were rivals if you remember, with Shiki even teasing him by calling him Kyo-kun. Whitebeard notes, however, that the arrival of the Marines is far too fast and fears that someone must have leaked their plans. You know what that means, it's that time again to play a game of the traitor among us, and finding out which one of the Rocks pirates betrayed the bunch for the sake of the Marines. Now, being completely honest, this is definitely not easy, as it could have been literally any of them. These men aren't exactly trustworthy, but among them there is one candidate that I do think actually has quite a lot of potential for being a traitor, Kyo, because as we brought up before, the theming of the X around him seems to tie him a lot more with another character, Diez Drake. His family name is pronounced as Diez, like the Spanish word for 10, but is written with the symbol X, the number for 10 in Latin, or Diez. Kyo similarly has X's on his glasses, a scar on his chin very similar to Drake's, another tattoo in his body, not to mention that his name, Kyo, is written with a kanji that literally has a massive X in it, hence why Oda used this name. Drake was a marine turned pirate, though in reality that was all just an undercover role, whereas his father Diez Barrels was a marine officer turned pirate, after he attained the Ope Ope no Mi but was killed by Doflamingo on Minion Island during the incident when Corazon stole it for law, which was also the same incident where Drake escaped from his abusive father and joined join the Marines. So perhaps the two are related in some way or another. Drake himself is 33 years old, so Barrels was likely around Kyo's age, so I think it's more likely that Kyo could be an uncle or similar relative to Drake. But this could mean that both Kyo and Barrels joined the Marines at around the same time, and as such Kyo is similarly to Drake an undercover pirate in a big crew trying to rat them out, which would make a lot of sense considering that he was the one that willingly came to Hachinosu to join the crew, which is quite suspicious. But then again, anyone else in the crew is likely given how quick to betray they all are. Although you could argue that Otoku stands to gain a lot considering that he is the one that eventually took over Hachinosu, and if he's connected to Karibu then he's definitely not really a trustworthy person. We change scenes to a new location in the new world known as Enishi. Enishi is an archaic phonetic spelling for the concept of a chance encounter, or a destined encounter, perhaps in relation to what is happening here. This is host to a country that is not affiliated with the world government, and as such government ships are plundering the inhabitants of the island as slaves to likely sell them off to world nobles, other interested buyers, or serve the larger slave workforce of projects like the Wolf Bridges. Harold stands in the way to protect the country, but ruins his current bid to join the government for better relations, which causes a big incident as the World Economic newspaper frames him as usual. The presence of the newspaper at this time is quite interesting though, as we can assume this is still 42 years ago, due to events later in the chapter still being at that time. However, according to the Viver cards, it was Morgans himself who founded the World Economic newspaper, but 42 years ago, Morgans would have literally been 11 as he is currently 53 years old, so I wonder if this is a mistake that Oda might retcon. At the very least, Ivankov cited Morgans as the writer of the article on the God Valley incident at a time when Morgans was still young, 15 years old, so unless his age is a mistake, then Morgans was certainly quite the young journalist. But I wouldn't be surprised if Oda pumps his age up another decade or so in the future to be canonically consistent. Harold appears to have shaved his head just as we saw him in later depictions, as an apology for the incident. But this has fallen on deaf ears. Later, as we know, he'd rip off his horns, so I wonder if that was towards the people of Elbaph, or if it was towards the government as well. He mentions talking with Garp, which shows that unsurprisingly they were acquainted too, and also mentions how John Giant and other giants from the Giant Squad joined the Marines, which as we know was thanks to Carmel's efforts to connect Elbaph with the government, or rather fundamentally selling its children to it. Outside the bar we see Haridin and Loki refusing to talk to each other, while Mato tries to offer Loki something to drink. Switching to Marine headquarters, we see the legendary figures of Garp, Sengoku, and Tsuru, who would go down in history as the trio that formed the Legends of the Marines, as they all joined in the same time and have been very close since. Garp is wearing one of his traditional tropical aloha shirts, while Sengoku is wearing a tank top, and this was at a time when Tsuru still had blue hair. The former two are enjoying sushi and tea as they are talking. They protest to Kong when the government has refused to accept Elbaph for, well, let's be honest, racist reasons. At this time they were all vice admirals, while Kong was still a marine admiral, not yet a fleet admiral, which is interesting because it means that whoever Rox killed was potentially Kong's spear, or potentially the one he replaced, given how that incident was already 14 years ago from this moment. Though certainly this doesn't seem to separate him from the desk, just like how his successor Sakazuki would be stuck with it. Now at present, Kong serves as the world government military commander-in-chief, essentially overseeing the military systems like the Marines and the Shichibukai from an administrational point, having been tasked with the succession of the next fleet admiral after Sengoku left. Garp, as we know, decided to stay as a vice admiral for more freedom, while Sengoku would become an admiral and later fleet admiral before retiring to inspector general. Tsuru, on the other hand, became the great staff officer, essentially serving as an aide to Sengoku as an advisor. Later that same year, 42 years ago in 1482, breaking news hit as Shaki has retired from being a pirate. This is consistent with her claims in Shabondi when she said that 4 decades ago, which in the Viver cards later was confirmed to be 42 years ago, she quit being a pirate after being chased by Garp and others to just open up a bar. As we see here, this is indeed the case. Gloriosa was originally captain of the Kuja Pirates, but quit after her unrequited love from Roger, jumping on the Rocks Pirates, likely for a chance to cross paths with him again. This put Shaki briefly as captain for a few months, but she seemingly quit pretty quickly as well, wanting to retire and open up a bar, so she passed on the throne to Tritoma, who would then instead rule for a much much longer time, until Hancock would take over closer to the present 11 years ago, around or after Tritoma passed away due to love sickness, meaning that Tritoma held the throne for basically 3 decades. As Gloriosa reacts to the news, you can also spot a young 6-year-old Katakuri on Linlin's shoulder, as well as his triplet siblings Oven and Daifuku. However, shockingly, Shaki shows up on Hachinosu in what is described as one of the biggest incidents in the island's history, clearly rivaling even the likes of the dissolution of the rocks or the Rocky Port incident. Here is where Shaki would open the first instance of Shaki's Bottakuri bar, translating as Shaki's ripoff bar. Just as we were told, she opened a bar 42 years ago, but it turns out the one in Shabondi wasn't the first one, as her first bar was located on Hachinosu, which the chapter title refers to as the Bar of Legends. This bar features a similar architecture to her final one in Grove 13, but without the large bubble-shaped dome that is far more iconic of the Shabondi archipelago. Her presence and beauty are unquestionable. Her very splendor makes the hearts of every pirate flutter, even the likes of rocks, to the point that even the heartthrob sound effect in the back of the panel sprouts hard eyes on its own in the place of the ducked-in lines of its katakana character. She is likened to looking like an angel, fitting with the wings around her apron, which also bears the writing Shaki and the symbol of the Kuja, the 9 snakes. Here she is even seen carrying the same earrings that Hancock would later wear. However, there's a statement here that completely reframes our understanding of the history of the rocks as we know it, and it's the fact that Shaki came to be coveted as the treasure of Hachinosu, one that would eventually be stolen. Okay, so it's been a while, so let's do a quick history refresher on this history of the rocks. In chapter 1096, during the God Valley incident, Kong called Garb during his vacation to tell him that they have received a tip that the Rocks pirates are heading for God Valley, where the triennial genocide tournament is being held by the Celestial Dragons. This is likely due to the tip that Genie sent out that led many pirates to head to the island, mobilizing the Marines as well after they began seeing their movements. Kong asked Garb to help against the rocks, but Garb dismisses it by saying, "Oh, you mean the Celestial Dragons' school trip? Well, I warned you not to poke the beehive that is Hachinosu," a reference to the fact that Hachinosu in Japanese translates into beehive. "You're underestimating how far they'd go. We're talking about the treasure of Hachinosu. Of course they'd come back to take it." This at the time indicates to us that the government had stolen a certain thing called the treasure of Hachinosu, and this upset the Rocks pirates so much that they went back to where the government was after receiving the tip just to steal the treasure back. During that same chapter, we see a shot of Hachinosu where the other pirates exclaim, "The Rocks pirates have already left. They got the jump on us. We gotta catch up. Come on!" This is a massive incident for the pirate world, showing that not just the Rocks pirates, but all the pirates on Hachinosu wanted to get their hands on this treasure. And we see this as the incident begins, where all kinds of pirates swarm the island, including the Rocks pirates. The Marines are confused, wondering what it is they want from the island. As the Rocks pirates disembark, we see each of them wishing to ascertain where the treasure is. Whitebeard claimed, "I just know that full Rocks will lose sight of our goal. We have to be certain it's safe first. Quick!" Stussy tells him, "Oh, Newgate, not you two." To which Gloriosa tells her, "Don't be so pathetic, Stussy," while she replies back, "Same to you, Gloriosa." Shiki exclaims, "I assume it's finders keepers," claiming that he'll get his hands on the treasure, but Big Mom exclaims, "I'll take the treasure." But then Kaido tells her, "But there's no point in you getting that treasure, Lin. She replies back by saying, "Let's just steal what we're after and scram. You're all pathetic, all you dreamers with your heads in the clouds." Kaido, however, says, "I hear Roger's on the move. He's the last man I'll let... Lin cuts him off, but it can be assumed he meant Roger is the last man that he'll let steal that treasure. Stussy believes this will be their final fight, and Gloriosa says that they'll finally settle this once and for all. Indeed, the Roger pirates arrive. Roger feels frustration, claiming not to have seen someone for a whole year, which we assume to be Rocks, but it's hard to say, while Gaban tells him no special privileges for the captain, implying that whoever finds the treasure keeps it, and Rayleigh instead sighs, "This is gonna be a mess." Garb joins the fray as well, though in this case he's simply interested interested in fighting Roger. We see Roger and Rox clash as they exclaim, "Get back here, Rox," and "Out of my way, Roger," kickstarting the God Valley incident, which was sadly off-screened. Now, at the time, a couple years ago, we had only this information to work off of. And our biggest hint was Kaido's statement that there's no point in you getting that treasure, Lin, which means this is a treasure that Lin cannot use. Many of us came to the conclusion this has to be a Del Fruit, one that Lin cannot use, as she already had Carmel's Del Fruit transmitted to her after she ate her. This makes sense as the prizes of the Genocide Tournament included Del Fruits, including the Nikyu Nomi, which Kuma stole, and the Uo Nomi Model Seiryu, which Ivankov stole, but Big Mom stole from him back before he could eat it. The fact that Big Mom claimed to go after this treasure and then took Ivankov's fruit seemed to imply that one of these fruits, or a third one among the prizes, was the treasure of Hachinosu that Rox wanted so badly, especially with Jabek's latest claim of needing 2 fruits. But here's the thing. In this chapter, we are told that the treasure of Hachinosu that was stolen was actually Shaki. And this soundly reframes everything we've just gone through. Garp telling Kong that he's underestimating how far the pirates will go for that treasure is how willing the pirates of Hachinosu would go to save Shaki. All the pirates of Hachinosu calling this a huge incident and setting sail to head to God Valley was for the sake of freeing Shaki. Whitebeard claiming they have to ascertain that the treasure is safe isn't about finding an item in good conditions like a Del Fruit that hasn't been eaten, but making sure that Shaki isn't hurt. And Stussy getting mad at Whitebeard is due to him simping after Shaki too, which is why Gloriosa calls her pathetic, but Stussy bites back at her, as after all she too simped after someone, that being Roger. Shiki says finders keepers because he wants to be the one to heroically rescue back Shaki, but Lin seemingly joins the fray just for the fun of it. And here we realize that Kaido telling her that there's no point in her getting the treasure isn't because it's some Del Fruit she can't eat or another reason, it's because Big Mom isn't gay. This is also why Lin states that everyone is so pathetic with their heads in the clouds, because she's making fun of them for getting so crazy over just a woman. Kaido also refuses to let Roger have the treasure because Roger is also interested in Shaki, and Gloriosa saying they'll settle this once and for all isn't as a fight, but rather giving one last chance to Roger to make her fall for her. Similarly, Roger likely hadn't seen Shaki in a year, and Gaban was talking about Roger not getting any special privileges because he wanted to be the one to heroically rescue Shaki. All the while, Rayleigh instead just sighed about how this will be a mess because he realizes just how crazy for Shaki all the pirates heading there are. Yes, this whole time we thought we were going to get the God Valley incident, but instead we'll be getting the Goon Valley incident, as this simping of historic proportions served as the trigger of one of the biggest incidents in history. Her being the treasure makes a lot of sense though, as a national treasure can also be a living person, such as Doflamingo calling Imu the national treasure of Marijoa, or Nami being called a national treasure by Woman of Wano. This really seems to suggest we'll see the incident now, given how we're seeing the trigger, as someone seemingly kidnapped Shaki to give her to the government, maybe even to force some demands on the rocks, or simply on behalf of a celestial dragon in the same way Genie was stolen. This likely done by whoever the traitor among us is, whether it's Kyo or someone else, which is why Shaki may have been at God Valley as one of the huntable prizes, or just as an accompanying slave. Something that, more grimly and seriously, is a very fascinating parallel with how Hancock would end up in a very similar position, and how many years later it would be Shaki and Gloriosa who would help rescue Hancock and her sisters after they escaped from Marijoa during the raid of Fisher Tiger. So despite all the gooning, it's actually kinda slightly wholesome when you consider the pirates were basically trying to rescue the darling of Pirate Island after she got turned into a slave, since she became beloved by everyone on the island, even if some of them surely had some more impure reasons for wanting her back. Though keep in mind we're talking of the God Valley incident happening 38 years ago, so we still have 4 years of history to go through before we get there. Yet another curveball is thrown our way before we close, however, however, as we cut to the Chamber of Authority, where the Gorosei have finally agreed to let Elbaph join the world government in exchange for one request: for Harold to kill Rox. We'll have to see how Harold has to face having to kill a close friend of his, particularly someone so strong as well, and I wonder if he refused, failed, or maybe even was involved somehow in the God Valley incident, certainly building animosity between him and Loki. An incident that at this rate may very well become a reality for us readers to see.